Hi, Jeremy Toy here today with Hot Bodies Racing. Going to help you guys install some MGP rear sets on a GSX-R 1000. Wide range 09 to 16 on this particular model. Basic tools needed: standard range of metric Allens and standard range of metric wrenches. Nothing out of the ordinary with that. Let's go ahead and get started. Start by removing the master cylinder bolts, which are a 5mm Allen. Alright, after those two are removed and you've dumped ample amount of Loctite all over the place, we're going to put a 6mm Allen on and go to the base of the rear set. Alright, rear set's loose. Let's go ahead and detach the rear brake light switch. And you want to check either the Hot Bodies website or some of your other aftermarket manufacturers for what is a banjo bolt brake light switch or banjo pressure switch. Real simple. And that will replace the standard pull type. Alright, let's get started on installing the rear set. They will come in the package somewhat pre-assembled. You'll notice that most of the bolts and stuff will already be installed. It's purely for reference sake. There's small O-rings and stuff holding the bolts in place. You want to remove all of the O-rings that are holding the bolts in place while installing that bolt back into each section with a little bit of Loctite. Alright, next step, we're going to go to the rear master cylinder. With that, we've obviously already removed the stock pedal. There will be your lock nut still attached on the rod right there. You're going to go ahead and back that thing off. It should come right off with your finger. If it doesn't, 10mm wrench on the top, which will show you that adjustment for the pedal later. That'll hold on to it. In your kit, you're going to see a spring with a big end, a small end. We're going to install that over the rod. Big end first. You'll see that slides up into the master cylinder nice and tidy. Push that up a little bit. Reinstall that lock nut. We're just going to run that up the shaft probably halfway. Not too sure where it's going to end until we're all done and have the brake pedal installed and adjusted for your own foot. So basically with that, we'll get this started on the shaft. You could take the connecting joint off by removing that circlip, or if you're just careful, you can go ahead and thread it onto the shaft like this. Save yourself a little bit of time. Alright, with this hand threaded up the shaft of the master cylinder, the only thing you want to be aware of is, let's get this thing all the way threaded up far enough to where when we hold it up and it's at its highest point of the pedal itself, you could easily align the bolts into the rear brake. Anything more than that, to align those bolts, we don't want to be putting any pressure on the master cylinder, making sure that rear wheel spins freely. So basically, we'll fine-tune the adjustment once the peg is actually installed, but at this point we're going to make sure that it's threaded up far enough to where the two mounting points for the master cylinder go right through without putting any pressure on the master cylinder itself. At this point, let's go ahead and mount the brake or the peg itself. There is the spacer on the back side. Go ahead and align that with the supplied bolt. A little bit of Loctite in there. Again, the mounting points are totally up to you. Uh, everybody's preference can be different. We've already measured these, so we're going to use the ones at the top and forward. Alright, now with the rear set installed on the actual sub-bracket of the bike, we'll go ahead and mount the master cylinder. Now, depending on where you mount the sub-bracket at, if you're going to mount it in the highest, most forward position, in order to gain a little bit of clearance, it's a good idea to trim the bottom of the side cover here. Give you a little bit more room for the hoses and everything to have a clearer view. Once, if you mount it in one of the lower positions, there's no need to modify it at all. So depending on your ground clearance preferences, there's an option for that. Other than that, we're going to take the longer bolts for the master cylinder, and again, these should run through just by hand. Get them started by hand. You don't want to have to depress the master cylinder at all. If you do that, it's incorrectly installed, and you'll overheat your rear brake. And now tighten down. You can go ahead and move your rear brake, but while spinning the rear tire, there should be no drag on the rear tire, and that'll verify that. Okay, now after we've actually sat on the bike and got the lever position where it's most comfortable for our foot, which means not having to raise your foot on top or move it from around the bottom, should be able just to basically just move your foot fairly in a short motion to get it on top. You don't want to be reaching for that pedal too much. So once it's in the spot that you like it, you're going to take the 10 mil, slide it in between the spring, and there is the rod actually has a 10 millimeter nut on it, and that's actually our adjustment right there. You can run it up or down the rod, as you can see it moving right there. Once you're in the spot that you like, hold that 10 millimeter wrench, 12 millimeter jam nut underneath the spring. Go ahead and tighten that against the pedal itself. Pull that out. There you go. You're locked and loaded. Last one to finish this off. Go ahead and put the heel bracket on using our Loctite. Side's done. Alright, here we go. Other side of the GSX-R 1000, shifter side. Go ahead and start with the main bolts on the rear set itself. Alright, same as the other side. Move those two. Go ahead and put that in the bag. Won't be using the hardware either. Next is the shift pedal itself. Start by removing the rod. Two 10 millimeter wrenches, one holding the rod itself, the other on the jam nut. Obviously one side is reverse thread to allow for your adjustment. Go ahead and back both of those off. Go ahead and thread that shift rod down. Alright, now with your snap ring pliers, go ahead and stick those in that little bitty hole. Remove the stock clip. If you don't have snap ring pliers, again, You can just kind of make it up. You won't be using that clip again. The stock post has kind of an unusual 17 mil base to it. Make sure that you have a 17 mil that gets on there correctly. Don't definitely not opposed to using even a crescent wrench on this one, just because it's kind of an odd bolt. Alright, with that removed, we will leave the stock mount, which does have 3 mounting positions for your shift pedal, and which one of those you use will be determined on how high you set the rear set. So don't be afraid to try different ones. Some will make it one will efficiently make the thing shift smoother. Alright, now starting on the install side of the rear sets, again, coming somewhat assembled, I've removed all the bolts and assembly O-rings on the back side of the bolts, and then went ahead and installed the foot peg in the desired position, the heel guard, both with the Loctite. I'm going to go ahead and stick a little Loctite on the mounting bolts for the rear set itself. Spacer on the back side of the rear set. Alright, pegs installed there. Shift pedal side, a lot of adjustment on this side. Your pivot point obviously on that side, you've got the 2 bolts in the center to lengthen or shorten the extension on the pedal, and then you have the pedal tip itself that has a 5 mil and a 4 mil Allen on it that is also adjustable. Again, removed the O-rings and Loctited everything, including the base piece. The pedal, just put it right in the center for right now. Might have to adjust that, determined on where our foot hits the shift pedal itself. Down at the stock mounting position, there are the 3 other mounting points. We're going to go ahead and choose the same one the stock one came off of and install that. Alright, after that's Loctited down and tightened down, you want to make sure that that moves very freely. If it's in there crooked or possibly something in the way, it could dramatically affect your shifting and ultimately ruin the transmission. So once that's installed, make sure it moves nice and free just like that. Now we're going to grab that shift rod, the Heim joint we've taken off. One side is going to be reverse thread, so if it doesn't thread right up, flip it over. Go ahead and start both of these at the same time, getting equal amount of thread on the Heim joint. Go ahead and leave that loose for now, because that'll be determined on where your foot wants the finishing position. So let's go ahead and put the bolt through the slot. Alright, with the shift rod installed, you've got an amount of adjustment here. So basically, the farther forward adjustment will be a quicker amount of shift, but a little bit more pressure on the lever. If you move it back, it's a little bit slower shifting, but a little less lever pressure. So for street application, we're going to go ahead and put it towards the back. You can play with that adjustment and set it up the way you like it. And then after sitting on the bike and determining where your foot intercepts the pedal, height-wise, you can adjust it via spinning the rod one way or another. the overall adjustment is you do not want to have to excessively raise your foot too high for pushing lever down, or excessively have to put your foot underneath it. Should be a really happy medium, same amount of distance traveled to get on top or underneath of it. And this position just happens to work for us right there, so we're going to go ahead and lock the nuts down. Again, one being a reverse thread. Doesn't matter what end you start with. Go ahead and 10 millimeter on the rod itself. Hold the rod as you tighten the jam nut down. Little tip with this, we're going to move both the heim joints forward as we tighten the lock nuts down. Like that. So it gives it maximum travel. Both your heim joints are facing one way or another when you tighten the jam nut down. Therefore it has full travel and less likely to get binded up when you're actually shifting aggressively. Other than that, we're all actually done with this. Plenty of adjustment there. Don't be afraid to try different things, just making sure that both sides are equal. And you're installed.